Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic that we actually mention frequently on the show, but we're going to be talking about Board Game Arena, or BGA as you'll hear us call it frequently. And you'll notice that it's just two of us tonight. Adam unfortunately had to back out last minute, and so we didn't get a chance to set a guest up and get our third host in here. But next week, when Chris is out of town, we do have a very special guest that's expected to be joining us. I'm not going to give any spoilers just in case she backs out, but you hopefully we'll have a pretty awesome guest on next week. In any case, this week, let's talk about Board Game Arena. Now, the poll question I have today is also about Board Game Arena. So before we get into the poll question, I thought it might be useful to give a little description of what Board Game Arena is, since I know many of our listeners do use it or are familiar with it, but many of you may have heard us talking about Board Game Arena. You don't know what it is. You don't know how it works. So I wrote up a little description here, and I'm going to read it. And then, Chris, feel free to jump in if you think I missed anything important. But let's see if this helps listeners understand what Board Game Arena is.
All right.
It is an online digital platform where you can play hundreds of board games, many moderns, but as well as classics, against other real players, not bots. You're not playing against AI. You're playing against other people, either real-time or asynchronous. And asynchronous means that you can take a turn and then the next person can take a turn when they're at their computer and so on. So you don't have to be sitting there playing at the same time. The rules are enforced. So unlike some of the other digital platforms, which are just physics engines, you do have to follow the rules. You can't just move components around and accidentally break the rules like we often do in real life board games. And you have to register to use the site, but you can play most games without a paid subscription as long as a member with a subscription invites you. So, and there's a few games I think that you can actually start games without a subscription as well. So, if you got a friend that you want to bring into it or a group of friends, they don't have to have subscriptions as long as you do, and you start the game and you send the invites, but they do have to register, which is really simple. Just create a username and password, basically set up your email address. The premium subscription, I checked what I'm paying right now, and it's only $3 a month. At least I think I'm on an annual plan. So it's $36 a year, but comes out to $3 a month. I don't know if there's other levels, but mine's just labeled as premium. And I think I have access to pretty much everything here. So it's pretty inexpensive to get into, even if you want a subscription with it. So what do you think, Chris? Did I cover all the basics here?
Yeah, I think you got it. I'll just add a little more flavor commentary, descriptive, in case anybody isn't that familiar with them. But when Tim mentioned physics engines, basically that means situations like Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia. And essentially what those are, for those who haven't played on them, it's a computer screen where all you have is a table and a board, and you have your cursor, which controls a little hand, and then it does absolutely nothing for you most of the time. It just puts the pieces on a table, and you use your hand to lift up a piece and move it, just like you would in real life, except you'd be using a real hand to lift your real piece instead of a computerized hand. The difference with BGA is that it's almost like playing a game on an app. And we've all played games on apps before where the game does all the work for you. You just make the decisions. That's what BGA does for you. And honestly, one of the things that makes it such an exciting platform to play on.
Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves by giving opinions, Chris, but thanks for adding that for help filling in the details there. And one other application that is similar to BGA that's pretty popular is Yucata. I think you can go to the website yucata.de if you want to check that one out. Similar type of interface. There's probably some other ones out there. I know there's some wargaming sites that do similar things. But in any case, with that description, let's jump into a poll. And the poll I asked this week on our Facebook group as well as on our Blue Sky account is, if you play async games on BGA or Yucata, how frequently do you take turns throughout an average day? The options I gave, the first option was every few minutes, and that got 0%. Hourly got 25% of the responses. A few times a day got 75%, and once a day got 0%. Now, before we get into your answers here, Chris, I got to say I'm a little shocked that 0% answered once a day, because I play with some people on Board Game Arena that definitely don't play more than once a day. They take forever. So that surprised me a little bit. But in the small sampling of people, I guess, that answered this poll on our Facebook group, that's how they answered. So how would you answer this question?
Well, before I answer that, what did you say it was for every few minutes? That was 0% also?
0% also, yeah, which also surprised me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's like on average, it's hard to say you're sitting there all day long taking a turn every few minutes. So, we'll get into that a little bit more. But is that how you would have answered, Chris?
And maybe this is why that wouldn't be a great answer. I do.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little embarrassing.
Yeah, well, it's partly embarrassing and partly that it's not entirely accurate. I mean, I work at a computer all day long. I sit at a computer and I could be just sitting there doing nothing but playing games on BGA and I would be happy as a clam. But the reality is I also care about my job and I want to do well at it. And so I feel like I owe it to my employer to do some work at work every day. So what I do is I'd probably say hourly. Normally when I'm at the point in my workday, and probably like once an hour or so, when I'm feeling like I need a mental break for a couple minutes because I'm reading things, I'm reviewing things, I'm writing things, I'm trying to digest some pretty heavy documents and things like that. I'll just take a couple minutes and I'll check out and I'll, move over to BGA and I'll take a few turns in games. And sometimes if I'm on for, say, 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, I may end up taking several turns in a game, depending on if the person I'm playing against is doing the same thing. So it's a lot of turns over the course of a day, but I try to separate it out into little blocks where I can focus on my work and then take a few minutes and go do that when I need the mental break and be at least somewhat responsible. So what about you, Tim?
Yeah, very similar for me. And, same, I'm at a computer all day long. I work from home and I usually have another computer sitting up next to me that has the Board Game Arena screen up there. But my calendar is just booked up with meetings all day long. So I tend to be in a meeting for an hour block and 5 minutes from the end of that meeting, it might be over. I'll check my emails. I'll respond to anything critical and then I'll look over. And if I've got some time before my next meeting starts, I'll take a turn or two. So it tends to be about hourly that I check, except I'll get to the end of my day and I'll look over at Board Game Arena. I'll take a turn in a game with Chris and then he immediately takes a turn back. And so it's like, usually there's a couple blocks of the day where Chris is just on and I know I can sit there and play through a full game with him or my brother Steve is on or something like that. It usually only works that way when I'm in a game with one other person. When you've got a game with 3 or more people in it, 2 other players at least, it's rare that you get all 3 people on and taking turns right away. So it's usually only going to be like almost a real time game when it's only one other person in the game. But yeah, it tends to be like that. And I, throughout the night, I'll check, I get done with my workout. I'll go finish all my turns on BGA. Then I'll go make dinner and then I'll take all my turns. So it's pretty consistently, I'd say about once an hour that I take my turns.
What do our listeners have to say about this?
Well, we had quite a few responses here, and I think they're all pretty similar. So it's an interesting mix, though, here. So Deborah Torreson said, I'll take turns in the morning and again in the evening. If my opponents are active in the evening, I may get multiple turns on. So Deborah is obviously not someone who's playing Board Game Arena while she's working. Good for you, Deborah. I know some jobs wouldn't allow for it. And, again, it's like Chris said, it's not like it's detracting from your day. It's just kind of replacing other things you would do in a break, which might be stand up and walk around for me anyway. Or in the past, I might, I got a few minutes. Let me just take a breather and check the news or whatever. Now I'm playing Board Game Arena instead. So, but some jobs just don't allow for that. Never Say Die said, pretty frequently, I tend to only start games when my schedule is flexible. So I'll come back pretty frequently throughout the day. The demons of OCD won't have it any other way. Derek Bruff said, usually several times a day between meetings and emails and such, and every time I get writer's block. BGA is my go-to when the paragraphs won't come. Yeah, that's great.
Smart.
That's great. Or it can also be a huge distraction. I know for me, sometimes if I got some chores I'm supposed to be getting done around the house, it's easy for me to get sucked in and get on BGA for an hour. Susan Michelle said, I usually check in when I wake up, during lunch, and before I go to bed. So similar to Deborah's, she's kind of just checking it when she's outside of work. So yeah, definitely. I'm a little bit more addicted, I think. It's hard for me to not want to know what the next action I'm supposed to be taking in my turn is.
Right.
Do you get email notifications, Chris, when it's your turn for something?
No, I check in regularly enough that I don't want to be getting the emails, because the way that I keep myself from getting completely distracted by it is I'll close the window and not even have it up, so I can't tell if I've got turns coming up. So and I just check in when it feels like the right time to check in.
That's smart.
It usually works.
Yeah, that's smart. I never changed it. I think it's a default setting, but I do get a notification if I don't have it open and active and somebody takes a turn, then I'll get a notification. And so that is something that will draw me back to the computer. Oh, I get a little ping. I'm supposed to go take my turn. I should probably not do that. So I'm only using it when I really want to be on there and using it. So smart move. All right, well, let's jump into the topic itself of Board Game Arena. Now, one of the reasons that I've been wanting to kind of do an episode focused on this topic for a while, because we talk about it a lot, and I think we have a lot of thoughts on it. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring this back is that when we did our recent mailbag episodes, one of our listeners asked us a series of questions related to Board Game Arena. And so I'm going to read out his statement specifically. And he's kind of give us a little focus on the episode, and specifically what he was asking us to answer. I think we're going to kind of feature in this, and what that is basically we're going to be looking at some games that we think work better on Board Game Arena, that there's reasons why we would play them there versus in person. And then there are games that we prefer to play in person over Board Game Arena. So here's what he said. He wanted to know games that are better or worse online versus physical. And here are some reasons. For example, a game might be a pain for the setup and breakdown physically, but a breeze online. Or online takes a calculation stage out. Like, I play Can't Stop on BGA in around 5 to 6 minutes, but wonder if it would be slower physically rolling 4 dice and calculating the score combos. Or do some online games lose the player interaction that's experienced physically? Perhaps Obsession, which online is all about the score, but physically might be over a pot of tea and cakes. Or the tactile feel of holding and touching well-made pieces versus looking at graphics on the screen. So some really good examples of why a game might be better on Board Game Arena or might not be better on Board Game Arena, and might detract from the experience. And so what we're going to do is take a look at our top 3 that we prefer to play on BGA, and then we're going to take a look at our top 3 that we prefer to play in person, and then just a couple more topics related to Board Game Arena before we move into our On the Table this week.
I love that framing of, the reasons why you might have a preference one way or the other. That was actually something that I thought in a very similar vein as I was putting together my list. So there's a lot of games that I could have put for either of these questions, but I tried to single out ones that were different in the reason why I think they make a good BGA play or a better real life play. And so for each of those, having a slightly different reason for it, or having them be an exemplar of, why I think that, one version is better than another.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one other thing to note is that, I think most of the time when we're playing Board Game Arena, it's async. So probably a lot of that feeling of what I prefer, what I don't prefer is going to come into this, related to playing async games versus in person with other people. But most of our games that we review, or many of them, we are playing together over video call while playing on Board Game Arena as well. So you can still have the real-time experience on Board Game Arena if you want to do that. And there may be some reason. I don't think I would ever personally pick to play a real-time game on Board Game Arena if the person I'm playing with, was in the same room or, across down the street or whatever, and we could play in person. But I do know some people, my parents, for example, almost exclusively play games together on Board Game Arena now. Some of their favorite games, they play Castle of Burgundy all the time, Ticket to Ride, and they just don't want to set up the game. They don't want to deal with handling all the pieces and everything. They just play BGA, which is interesting. It's not the way I would go about it. But anyway, the point being that in our preferences, I'm going to try to call out when I think the preference is because it's an async game versus, versus it's not.
Good point.
Why don't you kick us off? Tell us about your number 3 game that you would prefer to play on Board Game Arena versus playing in person.
Well, I will start, instead of naming the game, I'll tell you why I want to play this game on BGA as opposed to in real life. And the reason for this one, there are just some games that require you to do a lot of upkeep and a lot of remembering when you have the ability to do one thing or another, or when this thing happens, this other thing has to trigger. And so you're constantly sort of trying to keep track of this workflow of all the different things that happen when you take a particular action, or when a particular thing happens, what are all the different benefits of mine that trigger? And a perfect example of a game like that is Ark Nova. It's a great game. I love playing Ark Nova, but boy, it can be a serious beatdown playing that game in real life because there's so much of that stuff to keep track of. And I mean, I remember the last time we played this, I think it was it Sedona or was it Portland where we played it last? It was
Portland.
Portland.
It was Portland.
And I just remember, it was Long Beach. It was because Adam was playing with us.
Long Beach. You're right. You're right. It was
Long
Beach.
Beach. Yep. And I remember sitting there and I'm like, how many times in the midst of that game did somebody say, oh, wait, hold on, I'm not really cheating. I just had these 5 things that I was supposed to do and I forgot to do because something got triggered and I forgot to do this thing. And then we're trying to figure out if it actually affected somebody's turn after them, or, just that kind of stuff. That's nonsense. It's very frustrating. And even as much as I love the game, and I'll play it either way, I mean, all the games that I'm talking about tonight are all games that I'm extremely fond of, and I'd be happy to play in either scenario. But BGA takes all of that out of the Ark Nova experience. It makes sure that you are adhering to the rules, you're not forgetting anything, all of that. You get warnings. And I think Ark Nova in particular, the implementation on BGA, does a great job of giving you all these little triggers like, okay, you're about to do something that you can't take back. And then if you do it, then you move on, or you can hit the undo button. I love it when a game has an undo button, which a lot of them do now. Not all of them do, but Ark Nova uses it very well. It lets you undo all the way up until you do something that can't legitimately be undone. So I love playing the game on there, and I think it's a perfect example of that kind of a scenario where the upkeep is a bit heavy in real life, but not so on BGA.
Well, funny enough, this is one of those lists where we didn't compare our lists in advance. And I'm right there with you, Chris. My number 3 on my list was Ark Nova. I love playing Ark Nova online. I mentioned in one of our recent episodes that it's my most played game of last year. And I think if I added up the total number of games of Ark Nova I played at this point, it's probably 120, and most of those on Board Game Arena. And it's so easy. It's so easy to get into. It's so easy to make your choices. And of course, like you said, it reminds you, it just does it for you. If somebody else plays a Predator and you've got a card that gives you 3 money, whenever someone plays a Predator, you just get that money. And this game is so full of components and cards and iconography that when you're playing in person, you just miss those things. And in fact, I got a chance to play a 2-player game of this with the expansion just 2 weeks ago. And it was a wonderful play. I had a great time of it. But it is a lot to keep up with. It's a very heavy game to keep up with in person. While when you're playing online, it feels like the game just does a lot of that bookkeeping for you, makes it just easier to play. So yep. I still like it in person, but I was telling my friend who I was playing with that I don't, if this is one of those games where if my house burned down or we had a flood, I don't think I would replace Ark Nova, a physical copy of it, because it just doesn't get to the table that much. And this is why. It's just there's only a limited group of people that are going to play this game with me in person. It takes a long time to play in person. A 2-player game took like 3 hours. And it was a great payoff. It was a wonderful game, but I think this is just definitely a game that plays better online. That said, I have a local friend here who he said this is him and his wife. They play, this is their Sunday morning game. That's wonderful. If you got somebody that will get to this to the table with you all the time, and I suspect if you're playing it that frequently, some of this upkeep will just become natural and you probably wouldn't miss it as much. But I do think this is one of those games that in person, I've probably accidentally cheated every single time I played the game.
Oh,
either
absolutely
forgot to get something or forgot to pay a cost that I was supposed to or whatever. It's just so much to track. So great. Number 3, Chris, right there with you.
One other thing I'll add about it that I think makes it a particularly good play on BGA, this thing is a freaking cardapalooza. By the time you're done with a game of Ark Nova, you've got, 20-something cards sitting out in front of you probably?
Yeah.
And you're, generally trying to keep track of different things that different ones will do. Kind of like when you play Terraforming Mars, the tags become important. So that's another area where having it all online where you don't have to worry about cards covering over each other or losing track of it, whatever. It all just works so nicely.
Yeah, in fact, they give you a feature that doesn't exist in real life, which is there's just a little like kind of a dashboard right at the top of your player board that shows you how many of each tag you've got. And that's great. What a nice way to track that. I think it was Mosaic was a game that you have a bunch of tags to track and you actually have a tracking board that lets you kind of track where you are. But then, of course, there's extra upkeep to do that. So, yeah, that's a great point.
My number 2 is a game that falls into this other category that I thought about, and that's games where there's something particularly fiddly about it that makes it difficult to play with components that don't have a control, like, an electronic system keeping track of them for you. And the game I'm talking about here is Keyflower. So another great game, and it's another game that I would happily play live or I'd play it in BGA. But one odd thing about this game is that all the different players are using tokens of the same color. So you're not who you are on the game board, which is made up of a bunch of tiles, is not indicated by the color of the meeples that you're using or the color of the little resource tokens you're using, because they're all the same. So I might have a green token, you might have a green token. I might have a yellow token and you've got a yellow token. So the only way you can actually tell which ones are yours when you're, say, bidding on a tile is you have to put them in the right spot next to the tile that indicates who did the bidding. And there's no master board where it actually has a spot for that. These are little octagons, and you just have to set it next to the side of the octagon that indicates that you're the player that those belong to. And I've played this live a few times, and it's not terrible. I mean, it's not a horrible thing to do, but my goodness, it's so easy to just sort of glance around and be like, oh, wait, who's that? Wait, which side am I? How do I know who bid on that thing? Because I can't remember. It's even like that a little bit in the BGA implementation. But thankfully, what they do in BGA is not only is there no way to, say, knock the pieces around, so you don't have to worry about them getting scattered. What did Adam say last time? Something about the sneeze and scatter. It actually gives a little line in the color of your player color. It gives on the side of the octagon. So it's very easy to remember whose pieces they are. So, and that's not a unique thing. I mean, there's lots of games that have those kind of fiddly bits that are eliminated by BGA, but I thought Keyflower was a perfect example of that.
That's so funny, Chris, because I totally get it, right? There are definitely games where this is the right category. Keyflower doesn't fit that for me because for some reason, even though there's little colored lines on the boards, when I'm looking at this screen, it's harder for me to tell which player I'm interacting with. Like if somebody's in the top left of the hex versus in the top right of the hex, well, which player is that? Then I have to go and reference the color versus the player name on the right-hand side. When I only played this once in person with you and Steve in Portland. And when we played it in person, I don't remember ever being quite like having that question because the direction of where they are in the hex was very familiar to me, but it was only once. I actually bought this game recently, and so I'm excited to play it some more local. But yeah, I mean, I can totally get that. There are definitely some games where tracking is easier online than it would be in person. Just this one for me, for some reason, my brain can't register the players. It doesn't connect them to the little player colors that are listed there. So it gets me confused every time.
It probably helped that we were playing a 3-player game. The first time that I ever played Keyflower. And one of the things that is great about Keyflower is it has a higher than average player count. So you can play with up to 6 players. And the first time I ever played it, it was with 6 players. And so you had meeples lined up all around these things. And it was an absolute monster to keep track of.
That's funny. Yeah, I could imagine. That would definitely get more confusing. And it's one of the reasons I bought it, because I have a 6-player group that gets together regularly. And I'm excited to try it with them, but we'll see how that goes.
Great.
All right. Well, my number 2 for games that I prefer to play on Board Game Arena is kind of a classic. This is Seven Wonders. Now, this game's been around for a while. It's a card drafting civilization game. And the game's pretty light. It's pretty quick and simple, but the rules are surprisingly like clunky to try to teach players that are looking for this type of game. Now, not that BGA fixes that, but what it does fix is the time to play. This game is very simple and very light, and I've played it many times a person. Usually a fun time, 45 minutes to an hour to play a game. The great thing about it being a simultaneous drafting game is that the time doesn't really change. If you could have 3 players, you could have 7 players. It's going to take about the same amount of time to play. But something about dealing with the physical components just adds time to the game that doesn't need to be there. When we reviewed this game, we used Board Game Arena because we were all, in separate locations. And I remember we got to play like 7 or 8 games of it the night we reviewed it, because every game takes like 10 minutes. It's such quick, simple choices and just a little bit of the bookkeeping that it does for you as far as, the military phase where it just assigns out the points that you get. Like the drafting, you click a card and then you just have the next hand show up in front of you, versus in person where you pull a card, you put it face down, then everybody reveals at the same time. Then you pass the hand of cards. And then, you get to the next round, to the era 2, and then you got to deal out the cards. So there's those little upkeep things that don't add any value to the game at all and just add more time to it. Again, it's only a 45-minute or hour game, and it's worth it. It's a great game in person. Don't have a complaint about it. But my plays on Board Game Arena where you're just playing, every round is like 2 minutes, every game takes 10 minutes. Those were super fun, super slick, and it was just fun to be able to go back to this game over and over again and play 6 games in an hour. And I think that's exactly what this game deserves to be. And it just doesn't pan out that way in person.
That's a great call, Tim. I remember that. I remember playing that game, and I remember that phenomenon you were talking about, which is that it's a little bit kind of unintuitive how some of it works right off the bat. But it very quickly became clear when we started playing it on BGA with a little bit of, hints from you. And then the games just flew. I mean, it took no time at all. And we were just flying through those things and had so much fun playing that. So that's a great choice.
Yeah. Now, I've played this a little bit asynchronous, and it was less fun because part of the fun of it is like there's such simple decisions and such, quick decisions that you don't want a game like this to take too long. So this was one where I think in real time, it's better on BGA. Async, it's fine, but it feels a little bit more like playing it with people, so it doesn't really change it that much.
So that was actually a great segue into my number one game, which has that same sort of scenario where some games are they're not heavy games, but they feel when you're playing them like they're a little heavier than they ought to be, or a little heavier than they seem like they really are. And the game I have that meets that criteria here for tonight is Heat Pedal to the Metal. When we did our review of that, I think we all pretty universally felt like it took too long and it felt heavier than it should have. It's a racing game, and it was a nicely theme integrated racing game that felt like it should have we should have breezed through it. But the downside of it is that you had these multiple stages you have to go through. You've got these, you click through, I guess if you're playing it in real life, you have to go through this 5 stage. Like first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And by the time you're done doing that, playing it live, it actually takes a fair amount of brain power. So when we were playing it on Tabletop Simulator and we're like, okay, so first you do this, and then what's the next step? And what does this icon mean? And by the time we were done with it, it felt like we had been playing a pretty hefty game. After that, I played it on BGA several times, and the games just flew. I mean, it felt like a lighter game because so much of that what happens next and what's the sequence here was all taken care of by BGA. But then the interesting thing is after that, I went back to the hard copy version several times, and I've played it now, on dozens of games on BGA and a bunch of times in real life. And I got that same feeling of, this seems a lot heavier when you're playing it in real life than when you're playing it on BGA. Now, I know it well enough that it doesn't stress me out. I mean, I enjoy the game and I can get through it pretty quickly, especially if I'm playing it with other people who know it. We're playing it live now. So I can still enjoy it a great deal, but it definitely feels like a different game when I'm playing it on BGA from when I'm playing it live. And honestly, the feeling of the breezy, quick turns has a much nicer feeling on BGA.
Yeah, interesting one. And this is one I've only played when we reviewed it. I played it on Tabletop Simulator, like you said, and that's probably more like a more similar experience to playing it in real life, but can also add some clunkiness to it, which might have added to the slowness. And then I played it on Board Game Arena and I didn't enjoy it anymore, although it does feel simpler to play. But I would like to play this in person at some point and see if the tactility of moving the car around the board and if that adds some fun to it. So interesting.
Yeah, I knew how you felt about this game, so I was pretty sure that we weren't going to overlap on this one.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I've got one I don't think we're going to overlap on either, and that is my number one, and that's Res Arcana. Now, this game is a little bit of an enigma to me, and I'm going to try to explain why I think I like playing it on Board Game Arena more than in person, but it doesn't really make sense. So when I describe this, people are going to be like, you're just conflicting with your own opinion here. And I don't disagree. So Res Arcana is this little engine building card tableau game that's got a fantasy theme on it. And the idea is that on your turn, you do one action, and the action could be as simple as play a card by spending resources, or it could be as simple as tap that card to get a resource, or spend 2 resources to convert it to another resource. So it's a lot of little microtransactions, a lot of simple little things that you do. And somehow I love this game when I'm playing it async on Board Game Arena. There's an interesting build up to it. You can see when someone else has their engine running, and you've got to race them. And there's a tension to, we're both at 9 points. Which one of us can get that last point first? But the couple times I've played this in person, it just felt like a lot of tiny little turns. And so it's like, I get a resource, go. I get a resource, go. I play a card, go. And it's just like, it's not a fun interaction that you're having with the other person at the table. So I own this game with all the expansions. I want to get it played more if I can, but it just loses a little bit of the joy when you just are sitting there and taking tiny little turns that don't amount to much. Tiny turns aren't fun in games. And that's why games like Lost Ruins of Arnak that you've got major actions you can take, but then you also have some free actions, a little lightning bolt actions, so that you're not wasting a full like a full turn of just getting one resource. And I think Res Arcana is missing that. I think some of the actions should have been like, you can do a couple different things in a turn, or maybe take 2 actions in a turn like Terraforming Mars does. So in person, it just feels a little clunky, a little slow. On Board Game Arena, though, when I'm playing this async, I always have a fun time. Even if my action is pretty light, it's fine because I just looked at the screen, clicked one thing to do, and then moved on to the next game or moved on to something else in my life. So this is one game that just feels more fun to play on Board Game Arena for me.
This is a game that I still have. I can't quite figure out what it is about this game that makes me not gravitate toward it, because you've told me a couple times, Chris, you're going to like this one. And I tried it a couple times with like space between them. And I don't know. I just can't get enthusiastic about this one. But I do see your point about the micro turns, and that can be a little frustrating.
Yeah. So now this is a fun list to transition to, because we just talked about the games we prefer on Board Game Arena. And, Chris and I have talked about this before. We don't like getting negative on the show, but sometimes we do talk about things that don't hit as well for us. But this is a fun list because even if these are games that we prefer less on Board Game Arena, it means we get to talk about how excited we are to play them in person. So it's kind of like juxtaposition of positive on one side, but negative on the other. And then we just switched it so it's negative on one side and positive on the other. So it's all good here. It's all good. So we're going to get into our top 3 games that we prefer to play in person versus Board Game Arena.
And like Tim said, these are all great games. I love playing them one way or the other. So no bad vibes here at all. Yeah. So my number 1 is a perfect example of the game where the limitation is what's available on BGA, because you are limited to what is uploaded and coded into BGA, which means you might have a great expansion that you love playing with, but you can't because BGA just doesn't have it. And the game that I'll use as my example of this phenomena is Tapestry, which is one of my...
I knew it.
Of course, yeah, it's one of my favorite games of all time. But one of the things that's so great about it is the amazing expansion content. And actually, one of the best expansions is one that you can't get on BGA. It's the Arts and Architecture. It adds a whole new board. It adds a whole new track. And it's such a fun thing to do, but you can't do it on BGA. And this is a game where, even though I won't go as far as to say that it gets a little bit drab when you're playing it with no expansion content, it is definitely a game where I always want to play with expansion content if it's available to me. Now, thank goodness they have added plans and ploys, and they've added some of the expansion civilizations, and that's been great. I've appreciated that tremendously. But the bottom line is I just can't play this game on BGA the way that I want to be playing it. Yeah. Which doesn't stop me from having multiple games going on constant rotations. So I still have a great time playing it on there, but I always feel limited, and I'm always sitting there going, man, if only we had the expansions on here.
Yeah, I almost called this game out for the exact same reason, because like you said, they recently added the plans and ploy civilizations, and it's been so fun to get to explore those more and have more variety that come up. But I want to be playing this game all the time, and it benefits from having more variety, because even though there's a ton of variety in the base box, when you played it as much as Chris and I have, you want to see different things come up more frequently. Mm-hmm. So what they haven't added yet is more Tapestry cards, or like the blueprint cards that came in plans and ploys. So there's so much more expansion content that could be coming in this game that I hope they continue to add, but it hasn't come yet. I think it's worth talking about, how do games get on Board Game Arena? And I don't know 100%, but I've got a pretty good picture here. And I think this will kind of help you understand a little bit why you see games here. without expansions. So basically, this Board Game Arena has been fairly popular for a while. And a few years back, the largest board game conglomerate purchased it. So this is a company called Asmodee. It's a VC holding company that basically just buys up a bunch of assets to make money off them, and they happen to be in the board game space. So they own a ton of big board game companies, and then they kind of buy them. They make sure their biggest assets are distributed and everything, and you get the advantages of those things. But they bought Board Game Arena, and since they bought it, we've been seeing tons and tons of new games come up here, which is cool. So right, the platform got some money behind it, it got some assets behind it. But my understanding is the way it works is that if you want to put a board game up there, I think you can pay Asmodee to do it, but they have like a list. They kind of have like a list that you have to get into, and so it might be a while before your game gets there. Or there are programmers that can you can hire to get in there and put your game up there for you. So it has kind of an open source interface, from what I understand, where you could have somebody kind of upload your assets and code it and get it all programmed and everything for you. And they have an alpha beta program. So like when a game's first up there, it goes into alpha, and only people that have a certain number of game plays and stuff are allowed to play alpha games. And then they give feedback, they do bug reports and stuff. And then at a certain status, it moves to beta, and then it's available to the public, but with the caveat that it's still a beta game, and then eventually moves to full release. But there's a couple reasons why things might move slower. One, the publisher may choose not to put the assets up there. They may not want, like, let's say, for example, if Stonemaier Games wants people to be introduced to Tapestry, but they really want to still sell physical copies of the game, they may say, here, try Tapestry. We think you'll get addicted to it. But if you want the full experience, or if you want to try it more, buy the real version and get expansions for it. I'm not saying that's what Stonemaier has done here, but that could be something that's happened, because they have to authorize, like Board Game Arenas, all of their games are licensed. If it's not public domain stuff, it's all licensed. So the publisher has chosen to put up there, unlike something like Tabletop Simulator, which has a ton of illegal and unlicensed content, where anybody can kind of scan in contents, and Tabletop Simulator would be like, sure, go ahead and put it up there. We're not going to police this. So it could be the publishers are holding back. It could be the delays. It could be whether the publisher wants to pay a developer or just wait for it to come. I do know that, like, for example, Jamie Stegmaier had posted at some point that he had already given Board Game Arena a bunch more assets of different expansions for Tapestry to put up there, and they'd get to it when they get to it. So it could just be it's in a list. And I do think that the publishers do get some amount of money every time we play it. So there's a financial benefit for them to put it up there, but they always have to, of course, weigh, am I selling less games because it's freely available for someone to play? From my personal experience, you're more likely to sell your game if I have a chance to play it online and fall in love with it, to me, but I don't know if that's true across the board. And so obviously publishers have to make that decision and decide whether they want to put something up and give it to people to play at a very discounted price without buying a copy. Yeah,
I mean, it's a pretty small and, unscientific study, but every gamer that I've talked to, if they love a game, they want to own the physical copy of it. They don't know. I have never heard anybody say, oh, I love that game, but I've already played it on BGA, so I'm not going to buy it. Just saying.
Yeah. Now, what Jamie Stegmaier also said with Stonemaier Games, I read something he posted recently, and he said what they're doing now, they have a strategy. So they're waiting after a game has been released for 2 years, and then they'll put it up on a digital format, which it could be Board Game Arena, it could be Tabletopia, it could be an app, but they're kind of letting people get excited and get that new hot release out. And then once the fervor dies down a little bit, then they'll put it on a digital platform, which might inspire new people to get introduced to it. I think it's a pretty smart strategy there, but you will see some publishers that are putting stuff up on Board Game Arena while it's still in the Kickstarter phase, or when they want to drive a little excitement about the game. So, some different strategies, and who knows how they're working. I can't tell you that. We can only speculate here, but anyway, sorry to go on a long tangent about why the Tapestry expansions might not be on Board Game Arena.
And where are we again? It's like, is this your number 10 or what? Where do we leave off?
Number 3, the first one on the list.
Okay.
All right. Well, my number 3, I'm actually going to give 2 examples here. I'm going to cheat a little bit because they both kind of fall into the same category for me. These are 2 games that I love. Some of my favorite games. I think they both made my top 10 last year. And I also still love playing them on Board Game Arena, and I have almost constant games of them running, but I prefer to play them in person. And the 2 games I'm going to talk about are Terraforming Mars and Agricola. and they're for the same reason. And it's funny because they almost contradict what I said about Ark Nova. But the reason is that both of these games have, I think, a little bit more impact on the card tableau your opponents are building. And those tableaus are not very visible to me. When I'm looking at Board Game Arena, I can see my own tableau. I can see the main player, the main board if I scroll down a little bit. But it's a lot more work. I have to click to an opponent's board, or I have to scroll further down the screen to see what their cards that they've played are and stuff like that. And with Agricola and Terraforming Mars, there are clear strategies about what I want to draft, what I want to be playing, how I want to be interacting with the board based on the cards that my opponents have that really change the game. So I know that I'm playing less effectively in both of these games. I play very poorly with both of these on Board Game Arena versus how I would play in person because I'm not paying as much attention to what they're doing. Now, Ark Nova has that same effect, but it just feels a lot less impactful. Although there are cards that you trigger when you play something on your turn that your opponent has in their tableau, it's almost never going to make me change my play. Like if you're going to get 3 coins for me playing a herbivore, but I was going to play an herbivore because it's the one card I'm going to play it no matter what, right? So it just has less impact on my strategy. So I don't care that I never see your player board. It's kind of a multiplayer solitaire game, and I'm fine with that. I'm really just racing you for the points. Terraforming Mars and Agricola both have very significant strategic implications to when I take a space because I think you're going to take it, or when I build in a space on the map because I think you're going to want to beat me there because it's important to you. And so both those games I just don't enjoy quite as much online as I do in person, but I still enjoy them a ton because I've played both of them regularly and frequently. In fact, Chris, with you, tons and tons of Agricola. But interestingly, we haven't played a lot of Terraforming Mars together, even though we both love that game. So I think, do you feel the same way, or how do you feel about Terraforming Mars on BGA?
I liked it, and actually, I don't know what happened, but until you just said it now, I had almost forgotten that it was there. So I actually would love to get some games going of that. And I stopped playing Agricola against you because you kill me every time, and it's like it's demoralizing. So I'm trying to get better at it, and then I'm going to start challenging you again.
I almost want to play that. I almost want to bring that game to our next BGHT con in Big Bear and play it in person and see how it connects with you. And we could kind of talk through strategy a little bit.
Yeah.
Adam's not a huge fan of it, but he might like it more in person as well. So,
and I get what you're saying about them, and I think that actually also sort of gets at another issue with Board Game Arena. When you're playing async, like I find I'm not as thoughtful about my turns because of the fact that I got 10 turns to take. I got 5 minutes to do it in. So I'm blasting through turns. And, if I'm sitting down at a table playing Terraforming Mars, I'm probably constantly scanning my, the different tokens, the different tags, the tabs and things that I've got going on. And I'm just not doing that nearly as much in BGA. I mean, it's partially laziness, partially just because it feels like, I just don't have the time to do it. So I'm not playing them in the same thoughtful way that I'm playing a game that's live. And I think that's a real concern when you're talking about like what you mentioned about having to scroll down to see what someone else is doing and not having it be as obvious. If you're already disinclined to spend a lot of time on a turn to begin with, I'm also probably not scrolling around trying to see what it is that Tim's doing over on his farm. So I can see why that's an issue for you.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the probably big detriments of playing on an online async platform, you just aren't getting to enjoy for me, what's a fun experience of sitting around a table for 3 hours, or less or more, whatever, but playing a heavy game where I am spending the 5 minutes before it gets back to my turn, really thinking about what I'm going to be doing next and looking at all the stuff I can do and exploring the strategies in my brain. Like that's fun for me. It's not fun for everybody. I know some people get they hate the downtime. They get bugged by it. But for me, that's a fun part of the experience that I don't, if a game is going to require me to spend 5 minutes thinking about my turn, then I really don't want to be playing it on Board Game Arena or async because I just don't have the time to do that. So
generally true. All right, so that was good timing, Tim, because I'm going to do my cheat now, too. This next one I've got 2 examples of, and that's because this is probably the simplest, most basic reason why a person might prefer to play a game in real life rather than play it on BGA, and that is there are some games where the physical production is the star of the show, where you just can't get the same experience if you're not touching a component or experiencing the physical presence, the table presence of that game. And 2 great examples of that are Sulkin, the Mayan calendar, and Blood Rage. and for anybody who's played these games, it probably goes without saying. In both of these, if you're not touching the physical components, you're just not having the same experience. There's that big contraption of the giant stone wheels, the gears in Sulk in the Mayan calendar that I love turning. You turn it and it moves. Everything on the board is moving all of a sudden. And it does it in BGA, but it just doesn't feel the same. And then Blood Rage, I mean, it's a great fun game on BGA, but holy cow, it's so unimpactful looking at these tiny little squares that have a picture of your monster on it, as opposed to like a 3 or 4 inch tall mini of a giant
sea serpent, or like
troll.
or like a giant holding a rock over its head.
Yeah. Yeah, the giant, the frost giant or the fire giant or the sea serpent. I mean, they're so exciting when you take one of those and you put it out there on the board, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, everybody, be scared now. It just doesn't have that same, effect when you're playing it on a little screen. So these are games where it just isn't the same when you're not playing it in real life, because you just have to have that tactile experience.
Yeah, that's a great pick. And Zolkin almost made my list for the same reason. Moving those gears around is so much fun. I still remember the first time that I played in person with Chris, and he was like, "Don't touch my gears. I get to move them. They're mine. That's my game." And yet I bought the game, and that's the same way I've run it every single time I've played it. It's like, I'm the one moving the gears today. Don't even think about it.
That's totally legit. Totally legit.
All right. Well, my number 2 goes in a different direction, and this is, and again, I'm going to list a few different games. Sorry for cheating again. And these are kind of like social card games. So a game I've gotten a chance to play in person and just absolutely loved was Tichu. I talked about that on a show recently. It's on Board Game Arena, so I've been getting invited to some async games of Tichu on Board Game Arena. And while it's still fun, it just misses the fun experience of just that table talk, of the trash talking, of the laughter when somebody like busts out a bomb and just like blows away your whole plan. Like those social card games, a couple others that I've been playing a lot on Board Game Arena that, again, fun games, I'm happy to play them anytime, but are just better in person. Haggis, Six Nimmt, Libertalia. Like, these are games that just don't, especially async, you just don't get the same experience as if you're playing them in person. I'd say Libertalia is most impacted by the async because, everybody plays a card and you just don't see what happens. Like, all of a sudden, the next time you go to the screen, everything's gone and somebody got some booty, versus in real life, you're flipping those cards over one at a time. Oh my God, we got to flip. Oh my God, that person just did that thing. It's so much fun. So some of these games, especially async, don't work as well. But I think the fun of some of these lighter card games is that they do create a great social environment. They're not like a heavy Euro where everyone's sitting there staring at their components and thinking about their turn, but you're just having the fun around the table, and you kind of miss that, especially playing async. But why play? These are games that I would never choose to play online. The setup's easy. There's no downtime between turns. Just play them in person if you have that opportunity to do it.
That was a really interesting way to think about Libertalia, because I know that you've talked many times about how much you enjoy that game. And I've played a couple games with you online and a couple games without you. And every single time that I've played this game, I have been so disappointed and so sad at just how unfun it was. And I think that might be why, what you just said, that you're just not seeing the impact, or like it's never been entirely clear to me
totally
what just happened when I wasn't paying attention. When I'm playing an async game, maybe I would have more fun with that one if I was actually playing it live and you could sort of see things playing out as you go.
Yeah, even live with that one, it sucks because like once everyone puts their card out there, it kind of just happens. And so you can look at the log and see what happens, but you don't get the fun of like flipping over every card and the reveal of it.
Right.
And so even non-async, it's still not as fun as it is as playing in person. So I would definitely love to play that in person. I think it's best at higher player counts. Not that it's not pretty fun at 3, but like, I don't think Big Bear is the place to play that. Otherwise I would bring it to play with you and Adam. But like the next time we've got 4 of us together, if we get out to a bigger con in the fall or something like that, I'd love to get that out. I actually still think you'd really enjoy that game, Chris, if you got the true, real life experience with it.
I might, because I don't feel like I have gotten the experience. So my number 1 is actually not that conceptually removed from what you were just talking about. And that is games where there's some rule, and Libertalia is maybe a good example of that, but some rule that just doesn't lend itself well to online play, especially asynchronous. And here, asynchronous is probably a big difference. But in this case, I'm talking about La Granja. And the reason why La Granja doesn't play as well async, and it does play okay async, but there's all these little free moves you can do. And so it is constantly asking you, do you want to do this little thing? Do you want to do this little thing? Do you have any free moves you want to take? And so instead of having it be, I do a big turn and then everybody else does a big turn and then it comes back to me, I do a big turn and then there's maybe each player, has like 3 opportunities to take a minor or a free action in between the other turns. So you're constantly going in, and the only thing I'm doing is saying, no I don't want to take another little free action. And so that, as great a game as it is, it just doesn't shine playing async on BGA. Now, interestingly, there is another way that it does shine playing on BGA, and that is it's a game that has a lot of cards, and the cards slot into different places. And this problem was partially solved by the deluxe edition that you got, Tim, where they have very nice player boards. But, it's always nice to have those online scenarios where the slotting cards or the sliding cards do it on a screen where they can't be knocked over and you don't have to align them just right to get them to show what you need to show. So,
yeah, totally. In fact, that specific issue comes up a lot on async plays where I'm taking a turn. Let's even say something like Ark Nova, which I love playing on Board Game Arena. I'm taking a turn and I trigger the thing that says everyone has to discard a conservation card. Well, now I've just started my turn. I planned it all out. I thought through it. And now I have to wait 2 hours maybe before the next 2 people that I'm playing with have taken their turns. And then it comes back to me. I was like, wait, what was I in the middle of doing? I still have decisions to make here. I didn't get to finish my turn here. And so, anytime when there's kind of a back and forth in a game, it's really rough to play on async because you just don't get you don't get to have the fun of the full time. The big turns just can't happen in those situations.
So, Tim, be honest. Have you ever been playing a game and there was a thing you really wanted to do, but that was going to trigger somebody else having to do something, and you're like, the heck with it. I'm going to do this other thing that's not as good.
That's so funny, Chris. I don't think I've ever made that choice, but now now that you put it in my head, I think I may in some future time.
I do it all the time.
Well, maybe that's why I beat you at Agricola all the time.
Probably.
I can't think of a situation where that comes up at Agricola, but maybe that's why. All right. Well, my number 1 is actually a game that's an overlap with yours, Chris, and it's Blood Rage. And it's for the same reason. It's like this is the tactility of playing a board game, a physical board game, and Blood Rage is a wonderful example. I mean, I don't need lots of big plastic dumb minis in my games, but come on, obviously does them well. And this game rules because of the fact that you can play this simple little card drafting game with a little area control on it. And sometimes I get to put down that big fire giant in a region and blow everybody up in the region. It's just so fun to do that. And you're right, when you do it in Board Game Arena, it's just like you put this little square on the region and all the pieces are just, the things just disappear off the screen. But it's not like the big moment where everybody's swearing at you and you're all excited. And there's stand-up moments when there's a combat happening. So yeah, Blood Rage just definitely, I still like playing. I have a couple of running games on it right now, and I still like playing it on Board Game Arena, but it's definitely not as fun as it is playing it in person.
Yep, that's for sure. Hey, Tim, so we've covered our lists now, but here's the thing. I spend a lot of time saying to myself, oh man, I wish this game was on BGA, or this is a game that just would do so well on BGA, or why has nobody done this one on BGA yet? Do you have any games that you particularly want to see added to BGA?
I do, actually. I have two. One, I think that's both of these I think are risky, and I think if I actually got to play them on BGA, I'm not sure that I'd love them there, but I want to try them, and I think I could potentially get these games played a lot more if they were there. The first one is Cerebria: The Inside World. This is a really tricky game to play because it's a team-based game. You can only play this game 4 players. You can officially play it 2 players if you're kind of like playing with 2-player mats, which is probably decent, but I think adds a little extra overhead to it. But it's officially a 4-player team game. Now, I've talked a lot about not liking cooperative games, but I do actually generally like team games if the team games don't allow a lot of collaboration or don't require a lot of collaboration. And I've really had fun with my plays of Cerebria, but the one thing I don't love about it being in person is that if you got the wrong type of teammate with you, you could end up sitting there talking through every decision, and that's not fun for me. I don't like doing that. I want a team game where we're both making our decisions but rooting for each other and trying to do things to help our teammate and stuff like that. So I think Cerebria would be wonderful to play async on Board Game Arena, where, yes, maybe you had a little screen you could chat with your teammate, but you generally wouldn't because you're not sitting there at a table talking to somebody. So only when it's a really important decision might you type something up there. And I could totally ignore it if you do that, and I could just have fun playing it. I think this game would be a blast to play online. Also, there's a ton of iconography that's very indistinguishable. Like, you can't look at the iconography in this game and understand what you're supposed to do. So there's a huge player aid that you have to go and read it. But Board Game Arena gives you tool tips. I think this game would be a blast on Board Game Arena. Easy to find 4 players to just get into a game with, have a blast playing it. I would really love to play this more there. And Mindclash has already put an acronym out there and is a pretty successful implementation. So they obviously can get a pretty heavy game in. I think this is a good fit. The other one I was going to mention was Wonderland's War. And I was just looking at my collection and thinking about, like, what games would I want to have on here? And the reality is I just want to play Wonderland's War all the time. And it's a fairly long game in person, so it's a little hard to set time aside for it. But everybody loves playing it, so it's not that hard to get played. I get it played a decent amount. But I think it'd be fun to just have a game running all the time with this game. The one risk I'm worried about with this is that, you know, the combat in this game is pulling chips out of a bag. It's like everybody pulls chips out of a bag, and that could be really. It's actually one of the complaints about Blood Rage too, is that the combat there is you play a card, and so, oh, we just moved into a combat. Everyone has a big battle. Oh, but you got to wait 2 hours to find out the outcome of the battle, or to find out that, you know, now everyone's got to play their special card, and it could take a while. So I think Wonderland's War could suffer from that same issue, but just the idea of being able to get it played more is fun to me. So those are the 2 games that I just wish were on Board Game Arena so I could get them played more.
I toyed with the idea of Wonderland's War too, but I hit that same wall you did, the pulling the chips. I mean, at least in Blood Rage, you're only playing one card, 2 cards. Maybe 2, right. And maybe if someone plays a discard all your cards and play a new one, and then you play a card, and then there's a special card to play, at the most you're playing 3 cards. Okay. When you're doing a battle in Wonderland's War, you may have 10 different chips you're pulling out of the bag or more. That you could spend a week just getting through a battle. So, but otherwise, I mean, I absolutely agree. I would love to be playing that game more. And actually, that was one of the things that I purposely stopped myself from doing in this, you know, thinking through this question was, I don't want to just do the games that I want to play more, because I wanted a specific reason why I thought it should be on BGA.
Sure.
And I actually, like you, I had 2. My first one, you might be surprised, was Woodcraft, which you introduced us to in our last Portland Con.
Yeah.
And it was a game that had a lot of fun stuff going on, and I found it very appealing, but it also felt like a really heavy game with a lot of little detailed rules to be thinking about. And it seemed like the kind of thing where, with all the resources and all the different options, having a nice streamlined online presentation of it with all the different, you know, things tracked on a little player, I don't even know what you call it in BGA, those little in the top right where your player name is and all the things you have and all that. It could be super well done, and it would make it a lot more likely that I would actually get a game like that played. Because I'm probably not going to go buy it. It's not my core type of game, but it's one that I really did enjoy, and I found it very appealing. So that was my first one.
Well, before you move on to your second one, Chris, an interesting thing is that, so Vladimir Sushi, who is the designer of that game, he has a whole bunch of games in digital implementations, but they're all on Yucata. I don't know if he has like an exclusive relationship with Yucata or what, but you can find Underwater Cities, Messina 1349, Praga Kubu Regni are all over there, and they're pretty solid implementations. So I won't be surprised if Woodcraft ends up over there. And maybe we can chat briefly after you get to your second one here, but for some reason, I just don't enjoy playing on Yucata. Well, I know the main reason, but I just don't enjoy playing on Yucata as much as I enjoy playing on Board Game Arena. So I 100%, if Woodcraft it was one of the two that I almost picked here. I looked at my shelf and I was like, man, I'd love to be playing that more. And I think it'd be great on Board Game Arena. So that's a great pick.
The other one is sort of a cheat because it's almost anything by Awaken Realms. Because Awaken Realms puts out very complex games with really poorly designed rule sets. and in a situation where you could streamline that by having the computer take care of the rules, so we're not spending 10 minutes trying to sift through a poorly written instruction manual and the game's doing that upkeep for you. I might actually like games that I didn't like otherwise, and it might actually teach me how to play it better. I mean, I am okay. I'm going to say this. I'm going to actually say this. I might have enjoyed Lords of Ragnarok if it wasn't so freaking complicated with the rules. That's probably a bridge too far. I will say Lords of Hellas. I think I would enjoy Lords of Hellas a lot more if there was an online implementation. Another perfect example, Great Wall. I think there was some stuff in Great Wall that was actually pretty interesting and pretty compelling, but I never wanted to play it a second time because we spent so much time going back to the manual trying to understand, what about this edge case? What about this thing that wasn't spelled out very clearly in the instructions? So and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I would play those on BGA and I would be just as disappointed, but I feel like, there's an opportunity there to actually enjoy something that otherwise would be too complex.
Yeah, those are great picks, Chris. But I'm going to tell you the Awaken Realms game you didn't mention that would really benefit from Board Game Arena, and that's Nemesis. Nemesis is the one Awaken Realms game that we've all loved. It's really fun. It's really thematic. But the one thing it still suffers from is the upkeep. And it's not, part of it's the rules, but the things like the fact that every time you move into a room, you have to roll a die and see where the tokens go and place tokens around. Wouldn't it be fun if you just moved into a room and all of a sudden, boo, you see a die roll on the screen and then the things just populate, or all of a sudden a huge alien's in your room. Like, again, you'd miss out on the tactile experience of seeing those huge aliens for sure, but the upkeep in that game slows it down. It bogs it down.
Yeah.
The alien pulls where you got to go into a bag and pull the thing out. I mean, just having some of that stuff just happen would be fun, as long as the interface was implemented in a way where you got to see the fun happening on the screen. You got to see the tension play out. I think one of the things Board Game Arena misses is that if something is happening, don't just make it happen in the background. When somebody clicks back into the screen to take their turn, show them what just happened. And if Nemesis could do that, I think that game could be a blast, because you get to see the fun of moving around the ship, and then, ooh, this big event just happened. So maybe, I don't know, you probably miss out on some of the fun of interacting with the other players at the table and the big minis and things like that. But I do think they would make the game play itself a lot more palatable.
Well, I do think you hit the nail on the head that one weakness of doing an online implementation of any Awaken Realms game is that they all lean heavily on a big production, and you're not going to get that.
Totally.
I actually thought about Nemesis and specifically didn't mention it, though, because of what you said at the end there. You're not going to get that player interaction, especially in an async game.
Yeah.
Now, if we were playing live and it was doing all that stuff and we were online together talking and whatnot, because part of that, it's the paranoia of, hey, Tim, where's the ship going?
That is true. That's a good point.
Are you lying or not? I mean, that's a big part of the impact of that game. So, but it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. So before we wrap up today, I usually at the end of the show, I do a shout out to people who have left us a review on Apple Podcasts, or that have sent us a nice email or whatever. But today I want to shout out our Board Game Arena community. And if you're on Board Game Arena and you're not familiar with it, we actually have a BGA community, a very active one out here. And I would highly recommend you join it. It's so fun. And I want to shout out some of the people that really make it a fun time. But basically, if you're interested, you can go to Board Game Arena and then just click the community link in the menu, click Find Group, and type Board Game Hot Takes. Right now, we have 188 members in there. So a lot of people in there. But basically, it just creates a page. And so whenever somebody posts on that page, you'll get a little alert in the top right corner. You know, the same thing as if somebody invites you to a game or it's your turn or whatever, a game just ended. But we've got a group of people that are constantly out there putting games out to join. So they'll create like 5 or 6 rooms. They'll post the links in them with the names on them and just open up games for you. And I never have to start a game anymore because either somebody's inviting me, a lot of them from this group who I've gotten to play with and we're having a fun time. We're competitive together. We like the same games. So they'll go back and invite me over and over again. But the most fun part is that like some people will just sit out there and post a list of games that they've got ready to play. Half the time, by the time I see them, they're all filled up, which is awesome. I'm so excited that it's such an active community. But if you just want to see games out there to join into, or if you're interested in playing games and you're looking for people playing with, post them up here in our community. And like people are jumping into them right away. So I want to give a shout out. Now, these are a handful of people that have been posting frequently recently. I'm sure I'm going to miss some people here. So I apologize. If you ever post games to join on here and I've missed you, I apologize. I still appreciate it. But these are some people that are posting regularly or recently. Flickack 2000, L-Dub, JSogro 25, Blues 2019, Secular 11, Methbeer 14, and Jositas will frequently just list a bunch of games that they want to invite people to, and you can just join into them. So thank you all of you wonderful members of our community. I'm frequently joining into your games whenever I can find one open that I'm interested in playing or interested in learning. So thanks all for doing that. I also wanted to shout out some listeners that have been active with me personally on Board Game Arena. And I've had a lot of fun plays with. And again, I'm going to miss some people that I've played a lot of games with. So if I don't mention you here, don't feel bad. It's honestly, it's hard for me to connect the BGA usernames with individuals unless I'm active with you. So I kind of looked through some of my recent list of plays and I'm calling you out. But the first people that ever invited us, the first listeners that ever invited me to a game on Board Game Arena were Josh Drake and his friend Caleb, 2 longtime listeners of our show. I got a chance to meet Josh Drake at BGG Con last year, one of my favorite people I've ever met in board games. And they invited me to a game of Gaia Project. I think Josh ended up just kicking my butt in that one. Maybe it was Caleb. I can't remember now, guys. But had a blast. We played a real-time game, chatted through the whole thing. It was so fun for me. So thanks for starting that off with me. Also, JSoger 25 has just been running Tapestry, Terraforming Mars, and Ark Nova with me and my brother Steve, who you've heard about on the show before. But the 3 of us are just playing those 3 games nonstop. As soon as one of them finishes, they invite us again. And it's just a blast to keep playing the same games with the same group and trash talking with them and stuff like that. Eclectic Camel, who's a content creator, as well as Ryan from Mr. Rao Games. Eclectic Camel is frequently starting games of A Feast for Odin with us, and currently we're playing Blood Rage. We also have Lord of the Board on there, who's another YouTube content creator. Melba Mo, who's now a local friend, Mel, as well as Chris Prime. We have a pretty regular game of Ark Nova running. Mark MC21 and Travinsky, as well as Act Blake. Now, Mark is a local friend as well, but somebody that I met through the show. But we're always playing games of Agricola, Tichu, many others on there. Mark is constantly kicking my butt at Agricola, so I feel you, Chris. I never want to play Agricola anymore after those beatings. And then another person who became a local friend after being a listener, Who's Your Daddy, which is Scott, as well as Mark again. They've been playing regular games of Lost Ruins of Arnak and Voyages of Marco Polo and Architects of the West Kingdom with me. So it's just been really wonderful to meet a bunch of our listeners, the Board Game Hot Takes community, getting to play some games, getting to chat with them regularly. One of our regular listeners and a board game designer, Chris, invited me to a game with Tony Topper from The Secret Cabal, which is a show I've listened to for years. So it's fun to play a game of Ark Nova with Tony out there. So Board Game Arena is a great way to connect with other people. We'll play games with you anytime. If you friend me on there, my name is Denga, Denga, and just invite me to a game. If it's a game I know, I will definitely jump and play it. If it's a game I don't know, I may not, just because I don't have the time to learn the rules right now. But if you're posting on the Board Game Hot Takes community, if it's a game I love, I will definitely join in there. So please get out here, join in the community, jump into some games with our friends. And thank you to all of you that are active and hanging out with us.
Oh, such a great list. So many great people to play games with. I've actually been sad recently. I haven't had as many online games with listeners as used to before. And I thought that was maybe because I have not been nearly as active on social media as I have been as I was back when I was using Twitter, which I refuse to call X. But I moved off of that. But I'm starting to get re-engaged a little bit more with Blue Sky now, so maybe some of that will pick up. And I also, I don't think I realized what a resource that the BGA group was, because I generally don't use the groups on there. And I know I should. This is my own shortcoming. But I'm going to go on there and I'm going to start looking for games, because I'd so much rather be playing with listeners than just random people. And certainly anybody who wants to play a game with me, same answer as Tim. Just send me an invitation and I will, if I know the game, I'll play it. If I don't know the game, I might be less likely, but if I know the game, I will absolutely play it. My username is Dankaran, Dankaran. You said a lot of the same names that I've played with in the past, and so there's a lot of old friends there that it was nice to hear their names again. Just a couple more that I'll add to my list. Aussie Boy PDX, and I don't even know how to pronounce this, but Azegzao, who are local friends of mine who are also listeners, Marcus and Eric. Eric in particular is one of these guys who it's so hard to beat him in a game at anything. You can teach him a game that you've been playing for years, and he will beat you at it the first time he plays it. Just a natural gamer. So shout out to those guys. And another shout out to Figaro1, who is actually from Palm Springs. So always, nice memories of my time in California and, us playing games out in the desert, with whom I have a listener who I a constant rotation game of Obsession, because it's a game with which I am obsessed. And very similar to Agricola, I just can't beat him. Just can't win. So I'm going to keep playing, and maybe one of these days I'll get to a point where I can actually eke out a victory there. But in the meantime, just having fun, getting my butt kicked regularly.
All right. Well, cool. Thanks everyone for sticking around with us this week. Thanks again to John for some of the topic and conversation today. So thanks for the ideas on that. Stick around next week or come back next week. We do have a very special guest joining us next week, and very excited to have that conversation. Sadly, Chris will be in Iceland, so he won't be here with us. But Adam and I will be with our special guest on next week's episode. And the Board Game Geek Awards, the Golden Geek Awards, are coming up pretty soon. So please keep an eye out for those. Register on Board Game Geek if you haven't already, and give us a nomination when those come out.
I'll be honest, I do not feel sad at all about going to Iceland. And actually, I am not sure which one is more fun, doing an episode of our show or tuning in to listen to the episodes where you guys have I'm out of town and you guys have a guest host, because those are always so much fun to listen to.
It's funny. I've only missed one episode of the show ever where Chris and Adam did just the two of them did an episode without me. I was in Costa Rica at the time, and that was a blast. So I totally hear you, Chris. It's so fun when you get to just listen in on your own show as a fly on the wall. So right on. All right. Well, have a great trip in Iceland, Chris, and to everyone else, take care. We'll see you next week.
Good night, all.